The vast, shimmering expanse of the Pacific in early 1942 was not merely a theatre of war, it was a forge for a new world order. It was a crucible where the destiny of nations would be hammered out in fire and blood. As Japanese forces pressed their advantage, establishing an airstrip on Guadalcanal, the strategic importance of the South Pacific sea lanes to Australia became a tripwire for the United States. This intelligence, relayed from a jungle hideout, demanded an immediate and aggressive response. Yet, even as the U.S. additional hideout geared up for its first major offensive on Guadalcanal, the seeds of a larger, more decisive conflict were being sown. An act of audacious defiance, hundreds of miles away, had begun to take root. In April 1942, Colonel Jimmy Doolittle's audacious B-25 raid on Tokyo struck a profound psychological blow. Though militarily modest, it was a direct challenge to the honor of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet. It pierced the perceived invincibility of the Japanese homeland. The raid infuriated Yamamoto, hardening his resolve to draw out and destroy the nuisance-making US where fleet once and for all. It catalyzed his plans for the invasions of Midway and the Aleutians. He craved a decisive battle. He wanted one that would put an end to American interference for good. This period was defined by clashing personalities and strategic visions within the American High Command. Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, was a man cut from granite. He was demanding and uncompromising, seeking to be omnipotent and infallible. His personal vanity made him terrifically sensitive. He wielded his blowtorch personality to push for a Pacific-first strategy, often distrusting the judgment of others. He knew America had to fight back. He intended to lead that charge, but King's aggressive nature often clashed with the quiet, exacting leadership of Admiral Chester W. N. Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet. Nimitz carried the immense burden of command with a gentle but exacting leadership. It was a mailed fist in a satin glove. The memory of his friend, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, demoted after Pearl Harbor, haunted him. It was a stark reminder of the crushing accountability that came with naval leadership. In the early days, Nimitz confided to his wife, Catherine, the grim reality. He told her, "Darling, the fleet's at the bottom of the sea." He felt immense pressure. He lamented, "I will be lucky to last 6 months." The tension between the two admirals, one a mental bully and the other a man of quiet fortitude, reached a pivotal moment. Nimitz, despite his outwardly calm demeanor, was no pushover. He understood that to effectively command, he needed autonomy, not micromanagement. He confronted King directly. This was a rare and risky move given King's notoriously difficult temperament. In that tense meeting, Nimitz's quiet resolve, his unyielding belief in his own judgment, challenged King's need for absolute control. It was a clash of wills. But Nimitz's fortitude won out. The outcome was clear. King, grudgingly perhaps, granted Nimitz the operational autonomy he needed. This pivotal moment in leadership, a victory of quiet strength over bluster, set the stage for future Pacific successes. It allowed Nimitz's respected judgment to flourish without constant interference. With Nimitz now free to operate with greater independence and fueled by the intelligence breakthroughs of his codebreakers, the Pacific Fleet began its resurgence. The U.S. naval victories at the Coral Sea, and more decisively at Midway, provided the opening King had so desperately sought for a Pacific offensive. These engagements demonstrated the undeniable effectiveness of carrier warfare. They delivered a crippling blow to the Japanese carrier fleet. They irrevocably shifted the strategic initiative to the U.S. The Japanese thrust toward Hawaii was decisively parried. The myth of their invincibility was shattered. The Guadalcanal campaign, America's first major offensive, became a brutal, improvised learning experience. It was a curriculum of cruel and timeless lessons. It was fought on the fly and on the cheap in terms of material. But it came at an immense cost in lives. The toll at sea was staggering. Nearly 3 sailors died for every infantryman ashore. This fundamentally challenged any notion that the Navy had abandoned the Marines. These hard-won lessons in naval combat tactics and the sheer importance of human resilience, guts and guile, coupled with swiftness and surprise, proved as crucial as technology. They forged a new kind of naval warfare. They shaped future strategy. They solidified the undeniable strategic importance of the South Pacific sea lanes. The foundation was laid not just for an offensive, but for a new chapter in naval history. It was born from the crucible of the Pacific. By 1944, the Pacific War had become a grinding, brutal attrition. For the Japanese Imperial Navy, the balance sheet was catastrophic. Their once mighty carrier fleet, the spearhead of their early victories, had been systematically dismantled in a series of punishing engagements. Most notable was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. This devastating loss explicitly left their carriers detoothed as offensive weapons. It meant Japan's carrier air power and pilot pool were effectively decimated. The illusion of significant carrier-based air capability was shattered. Facing this dire reality and the looming threat to their resource-rich domains, the Imperial High Command devised its last, desperate gamble. This was the Shogo Plan. This high-stakes offensive, with its 4 variations, was born from the deeply ingrained doctrine of decisive battle. It was a desperate hope to turn the war's tide in one grand climactic engagement. The Shuwan Plan, specifically designed to defend the Philippines, was a complex, multi-fleet strategy. It implicitly acknowledged their diminished air strength by relying on the aging battleship fleet. It was a desperate roll of the dice. It was compelled by the perceived threat to the Japanese homeland and the understanding that failure would be final. The American response to this evolving threat was a testament to its unparalleled industrial might and adaptability. The urgent need for naval assets spurred a massive industrial mobilization. This led to the rapid production of new vessel types and the rigorous training of their crews. Shipyards working around the clock churned out vessels at an astonishing rate. This was perhaps best symbolized by the mass production of escort carriers, or CVEs. Constructed rapidly from cargo ship hulls, these vessels, often dismissed as Kaiser coffins, were nonetheless vital. They provided crucial, decentralized air capability across the vast Pacific theater. They embodied America's capacity to convert industrial output directly into strategic advantage, even if individual ships were considered expendable. The shortage of full destroyers, too, necessitated ingenuity. Smaller, cheaper destroyer escorts, or Ds, like the USS Samuel B. Roberts, were pressed into crucial screening roles for these escort carriers. They filled gaps in the fleet. They highlighted the resourcefulness of the US Navy in adapting to the evolving nature of naval warfare. Within these rapidly expanding fleets, camaraderie and identity were forged in the crucible of shared hardship. This often happened under unique and inspiring leadership. Rigorous training, sometimes under skilled officers like Lieutenant Hagen on the USS Johnston, transformed inexperienced crews into effective fighting units. They mastered advanced radar fire control systems. This dedication challenged any lingering notion that older, more traditional officers always understood the future of warfare better than their younger, more adaptable counterparts. Captains like Ernest Evans, whose aggressive and protective approach defined his ship's ethos, were pivotal in this process. His unwavering declaration that the Johnston will never retreat from an enemy force instilled a fierce fighting spirit. Shared rituals, such as the crossing the line ceremony, temporarily blurred the meritocracy of rank. They allowed men like Lieutenant Commander Robert Witcher Copeland to share a moment of human connection with his crew. This solidified a deep sense of belonging that was crucial for morale. Furthermore, close proximity shore bombardment missions, where the ship's guns glowed red and crews witnessed the raw consequences of war, served as profound experiences. These cemented crew identity. They demonstrated the human cost of their duty. On the escort carriers, the development of composite squadrons, or VCs, mixing fighter and bomber roles, was a necessary adaptation for limited carrier space. This ensured maximum firepower. Behind these squadrons, meticulous pilot training systems produced highly skilled and adaptable naval aviators. These aviators would soon face the ultimate test against Japan's last desperate gamble. As the American invasion of Leyte commenced, General Douglas MacArthur, driven by his solemn vow to return, had already waded ashore on October 20, 1944. His pressed khakis and corncob pipe were a defiant symbol. The Philippines, a crucial artery for Japan's resource empire, had become the focal point of the Pacific War. In response, Japan unleashed its last desperate gamble. This was the Shuwan Plan. This extravagantly optimistic multi-fleet strategy aimed to converge 4 separate forces on the Philippines. It was a desperate bid to halt the Allied advance and turn the tide of a war that was already slipping away. At the heart of this complex Japanese maneuver was a calculated deception. Admiral William F. Halsey Jr. Quote, "The mighty shield tasked with protecting the Leyte invasion was lured north by Admiral Jasaburo Ozawa's decoy carrier force. This was no mere misdirection. It was a critical misjudgment by Halsey. It was driven by his singular focus on destroying Japanese carriers, his white whale. It was also influenced by an amendment to his orders from Admiral Nimitz that prioritized destruction of major portion of the enemy fleet. Halsey, convinced Ozawa's force was the primary threat, committed his entire Third Fleet north at 824. His subordinates, including Vice Admiral Willis Ching Lee and Commodore Arleigh Burke, voiced doubts. They urged him to cover the vital San Bernardino Strait. But Halsey, who disdained his public bull persona as an artifice, considered it childish to stand idle sentry. He assumed the Seventh Fleet would automatically guard the strait. This aggressive pursuit, leaving San Bernardino Strait open and the invasion beaches inadequately protected, created a fatal vulnerability for the American forces. It directly challenged the simplistic, unyielding bull Halsey persona. His decision, rooted in ambiguous and conflicting orders and compounded by a crucial communication breakdown, left the Seventh Fleet's escort carriers and troop transports catastrophically exposed. It revealed a critical flaw in American naval command and control that would soon have dire consequences. Simultaneously, Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force, comprising the older battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, aggressively advanced through the narrow Surigao Strait. Nishimura, perhaps influenced by personal grief over his son's death, held no illusions about his chances for victory. He sailed directly into what he knew was a meticulously planned American trap. He was facing nearly certain death. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commander of the American Seventh Fleet's bombardment group, had meticulously orchestrated a layered defense. He utilized the strait's geography to his advantage. His trap was a masterpiece of naval strategy. It involved successive waves of PT boats, lurking like schools of barracuda, followed by 3 squadrons of destroyers, then cruisers, and finally 6 battleships under Admiral George L. Weyler. These battleships were no ordinary vessels. 5 of them were Pearl Harbor survivors. They were resurrected old souls of the U.S. Navy. Their successful salvage and repair transformed these ghost ships into formidable fighting units through modernization and advanced radar. It proved their continued relevance. It definitively debunked the myth of battleship obsolescence. Thousands of civilian engineers and Navy technicians had worked around the clock to bring them back. It was a resurgence Admiral Yamamoto had foreseen but tragically underestimated. Equipped with modernized radars and advanced fire control systems, these ships could now fire shells 14 to 16 inches wide and as tall as a man at extended ranges. Their capabilities far surpassed their pre-war forms. As Nishimura's southern force entered Surigao Strait, the trap sprung. At 2:40 a.m. on October 25, 1944, the destroyer McGowan reported enemy contact. This initiated the engagement. Around 10:50 p.m., Lieutenant Commander Robert A. Leeson's PT boats commenced their noisy dance of high-speed, hit-and-run torpedo attacks. They disrupted the Japanese formation. One PT boat skipper exclaimed, "My God, there are 2 more big ones, and maybe another," as the fiery reception began. These attacks were followed by Captain Jesse G. Coward and Captain Roland Smoot's destroyer squadrons. They launched a coordinated torpedo barrage. At 3:08 a.m., the battleship Fuso was hit. This led to a massive magazine explosion at 3:44 a.m., with flames reaching above the mastheads. The 39,154-ton vessel broke apart with a sizzling noise like a huge red-hot iron plunged into the water. Its 2 halves acquired separate lives. At 3:53 a.m., the battleship West Virginia, one of the Pearl Harbor survivors, opened fire. This marked the start of the major gunfire phase. Oldendorf's nearly 3-mile-long battle line had successfully crossed the T. This allowed his ships to concentrate their fire on Nishimura's column. The devastating barrage, described as a semicircle of fire and a continual stream of lighted railroad cars going over a hill under the hot white light of searchlights, was so accurate that a U.S. gunnery officer aboard the West Virginia reportedly laughed aloud at a first salvo hit. The Japanese, caught like animals in a cage, responded by frantically throwing steel through 360 degrees. Within minutes, the battleship Yamashiro, its captain Katsukio Shinado going down with his ship, was consumed by flames. It listed heavily and capsized at 4:19 a.m. In the pale pre-dawn twilight, the scene in Surigao Strait was appalling, as described by Lieutenant James L. Holloway III. Pillars of billowing black smoke rose from the wreckage. The oily surface of the Gulf was littered with debris and hundreds of Japanese sailors. Most of them refused rescue, choosing their fate over American aid. The Battle of Surigao Strait was a near-total annihilation of Nishimura's force. It effectively ended Japan's battleship era and their ability to conduct offensive naval operations. Despite this decisive victory in Surigao Strait, the diversion of Halsey's fleet allowed Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force to pass undetected through San Bernardino Strait. This formidable column of 23 warships was 10 miles long. It included the two largest warships afloat, the Yamato and the Musashi. In the moonless calm after midnight, this giant stalked through the darkness on a 1,000-mile journey through perilous waters. It created a moment of extreme peril for the Leyte invasion. The strait was undefended. The night remained eerily quiet as Kurita's armored behemoth steamed toward Leyte Gulf. It was Bill Brooks, an Avenger pilot, who provided the initial, albeit disbelieved, warning. Launching into the cloudy morning sky at 5:45 a.m., Brooks's methodical search pattern led him to break through the clouds at 6:43 a.m. He revealed a terrifying sight. He saw the pagoda masts and biggest red meatball flag on the biggest battleship he had ever seen. He immediately reported the sighting to Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commander of Taffy 3, but Sprague, initially disbelieving, thought it was some screwy young aviator reporting part of our own forces. To confirm, Brooks courageously dove back into intense Japanese anti-aircraft fire. His gunner, Joe Downs, described the flak bursts as a burning ring of white tinfoil. The sky turned black with a dense pattern of black clouds hanging like layers of charcoal. This critical delay in Taffy 3's awareness of the imminent threat would prove almost fatal. Compounding the unfolding disaster, the delayed and convoluted communication routing of Admiral Kincaid's crucial query about Halsey's Task Force 34's position revealed a critical flaw in American naval command and control. Kincaid's message, sent at 4:12 a.m. on October 25, asking about Task Force 34's disposition to guard the strait, was delayed and convoluted. It reached Halsey hours later. The communication breakdown reached its peak at 6:48 that morning. Admiral Nimitz sent his terse yet impactful query to Halsey. Turkey trots to water, Gigi. Where is repeat? Where is Task Force 34R? The world wonders. This message, delivered with a literary flourish referencing Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade, stunned Halsey. It forced him to confront the catastrophic strategic void he had created. The tranquil midwatch off Samar was shattered not by a storm, but by a rising tide of terror. Greenhorn enlistees and seasoned sailors alike, on ships like the USS Samuel B. Roberts, heard the distant, frantic scuttlebutt crackling over tactical circuits. Something immense, something catastrophic, was unfolding. Then, the cathode green fluorescence of radarscopes painted the horrifying truth. The long silhouettes of 23 warships of Kurita's center force, the mightiest ships of the Japanese Navy, the last hope of a staggering empire, bore down on them. Rear Admiral Clifton I.F. Sprague, commander of Taffy 3, received the initial disbelieved warnings. The second, definitive report from Avenger pilot Bill Brooks, who had courageously flown into a blizzard of flak to confirm the identity of the Japanese super battleships, left no room for doubt. Sprague now faced overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. The air around his vulnerable escort carriers, previously quiet, began to fill with the crackling whistle of incoming shells. Each one was a bullet train from the colossal Japanese guns. These projectiles struck the sea with a deafening slap and roar. They sent up towers of dye-stained water in a terrifying rainbow of colours. For men like Thomas Sullivan, a torpedoman on the USS Johnston, the first shell splashes were momentarily mistaken for dolphins. Seaman Bill Mercer on the same ship made a grim joke about bacon, believing it might be his last meal. Sprague, recognizing the futility of a direct gun battle, made an immediate, decisive choice. He flipped on the TBS radio. His voice cut through the rising din. An order to turn east into the wind was given. I thought, we might as well give them all we've got before we go down, he reflected. He added, if we were going to expend ourselves, I wanted to make it count. The flight decks of the escort carriers, even as near misses erupted with a boom-boom rump, became a frantic hive of activity. Pilots, like Lieutenant Junior Grade Earl Archer, a former daredevil, prayed, "Lord, please don't let me die sitting here on deck," as they waited their turn. Ordnance men, knowing the carriers were explosive death traps, wheeled bombs and rockets to the edge of the deck and dumped them overboard. They were stripping their ships bare for a desperate fight. Then came the order for the small boys, the destroyers and destroyer escorts, to engage. Admiral Sprague's voice carried the grim weight of command. Prepare torpedo groups. This was no mere engagement. It was a suicidal charge directly into the heart of the Japanese battle line. Captain Ernest Evans of the USS Johnston, a short, barrel-chested dynamo, embodied this aggressive spirit. He had already driven his ship into the teeth of the enemy. He crippled the heavy cruiser Kumano with a daring torpedo attack that disrupted the Japanese formation and bought precious minutes. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort, a mere tiny cog in the vast machinery of war, was never designed for such a fight, yet under Captain Robert W. Copeland, she became a bantamweight assailant against the cream of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Copeland, feeling like a short-armed boxer enduring blows that couldn't be returned, made the audacious decision to attack independently. He ordered his boilers, designed for 440 pounds of steam, to 660. He told his engineer Lucky, "Don't worry about your reduction gears or your boilers or anything, because there's all hell being thrown at us up here, and we're just fortunate we haven't been hit yet." His defiant, "Well, sis on you, Pister." "Let's go," echoed the desperate courage that coursed through the ship. She closed to just over 2 miles. A rudimentary gunnery system, a computer that knew no fear, directed a relentless barrage at the heavy cruiser Chikuma. Gunner's mate third-class Paul Henry Carr and his crew in Gun 52 fired an astonishing 324 rounds in 35 minutes. They set the Chikuma ablaze from bridge to fighting tops, silencing a gun turret. The crew, initially scared, quickly became too busy fighting to dwell on fear. They embodied the ultimate sacrifice. Other small boys followed. The USS Hole, under Captain Kintberger, laid a smokescreen, though it inadvertently provided a high-contrast backdrop for Japanese gunners. Seaman First Class Sam Lucas vividly recalled the crack of the guns and the projectiles as they passed overhead. They sounded like boxcars going through the air, end over end. The ship absorbed devastating hits. A shell tore into the forward fare room, creating a holocaust of superheated steam and killing 16 of 17 men. Despite its fire control radar gone and its rudder locked hard to port, the Hoel launched its torpedoes. Its last 5 were on the fly as it wheeled around and around, out of control, helpless to evade. The Heermann, commanded by Captain Amos Hathaway, fired 10 torpedoes. 7 were hot, straight, and normal. They forced the battleship Haruna to maneuver defensively as its 4 turrets flashed as one, sending heavy rounds screaming overhead. The Japanese flagship Yamato and the Nagato were forced to turn north for 10 decisive minutes. They avoided the giant-slaying qualities of these torpedoes. This effectively took Kurita's flagship and a significant portion of his force out of the battle at a critical juncture. Simultaneously, the escort carrier aircraft, the Blue Hornets and Avenging Angels, launched relentless piecemeal air attacks. Despite their limited armament, some pilots flew without ordnance as decoys. They descended on the Japanese ships like a flight of birds at the first crack of a shotgun. Pilots like Ensign Joseph McGraw executed 11 steep strafing runs, while Ensign Lisher and Lieutenant Richard Roby attacked destroyers, Roby even bluffing with phantom torpedoes after his guns jammed. Lieutenant Commander Richard L. Fowler led a group that walked a brace of bombs right up her back. The air was thick with green-dyed shell splashes. Flak peppered the sky. The hot spray of tracers was everywhere. These phantom and real air attacks created chaos and confusion. They forced Kurita to scatter his ships and break formation. The heavy cruiser Chokai took a hard blow. It signaled engine out of commission and Roda Sheepty. Its crippling was potentially delivered by the Peshuta crew of the escort carrier, USS White Plains, firing its small guns. This was a stark illustration of how even the largest, seemingly invincible ships were vulnerable. The Samuel B. Roberts's final stand was a testament to impossible courage. After inflicting devastating damage on the Chikuma, she took her first hits from the battleship Congo. Captain Copeland executed a desperate braking maneuver. He ordered all engines back full. The ship shuddered, its stern nearly backed under water, but 3 8-inch shells from another heavy cruiser ripped into her. The third struck the forward furroom. It tore steam lines, creating a hissing horror and a storm of asbestos. Teenage Seaman Jackson McCaskill, a former flop, heroically turned off fires and spun valves using the headphones of a fallen comrade. This hit destroyed the forward boiler, crippling the Robert's speed and maneuverability. On the bridge, a shell-shocked Elbert Gentry was relieved at the helm by Captain Copeland himself. Moments later, a catastrophic blast from a prematurely cooked-off shell in Gun 52 instantly killed Paul Henry Carr and his crew. The deck was torn away. It was a yawning mass of blackened metal. A gaping hole at its waterline, large enough to garage a semi-trailer parked sideways, consumed the ship. Flaming oil and tar oozed everywhere. Yet the Roberts, a crudely holed wreck of scorched and twisted steel, continued to fight until ordered to abandon ship. Despite sinking the USS Johnston, USS Hull, USS Gambier Bay, and the USS Samuel B. Roberts, and being on the cusp of a major victory, Admiral Kurita made a controversial decision. He was plagued by battle fatigue. He had not slept in 3 days. He was also suffering from misinterpretations of the situation. He decided to break off the attack and withdraw. His fleet, strung out across 30 miles of ocean, had been relentlessly harassed by aircraft like angry hornets and the audacious charges of the small boys. This led him to believe he was facing a much larger American fleet. At 9:11 a.m., Kurita issued his withdrawal order. It was a decision beyond comprehension to the American forces who were on the verge of annihilation. It was a turning point that saved Taffy III in the Leyte invasion. He had seen his proudest ships battered and sunk. He perceived his enemy's every act as evidence of its strength. He believed he had conquered giants even though he had been outfought by pygmies. The mighty center force was going home. The horror, however, was far from over. Shortly before 11 a.m., Taffy III came under a new, horrific mode of warfare. This was wholesale kamikaze attack. 5 kamikaze aircraft plummeted towards the carriers. The USS St. Lo, her thin skin offering little protection, became a target. One kamikaze, initially mistaken for a friendly aircraft, rose up, nosed over, and plunged into her flight deck. The engine tore loose, skidding off the bow. The main impact penetrated 4 inches of wood, exploding below decks. Ordnanceman John Gettus and Chief Petty Officer Earl Roberts witnessed their meticulously organized world of ordnance transform into a hellish, flaming maelstrom. 8 catastrophic explosions ripped through the ship. Burning aviation fuel flowed across the hangar deck. Secondary blasts launched a 100-foot span of the flight deck high into the air. The St. Lo, torn so severely that her port list abruptly reversed, reeled to starboard. She rolled completely over. She lifted her bow before backing herself under. Her final protest was the muffled thump of her boilers detonating. This sent a pressure wave through the water. It was a new and horrific dimension to the battle. The battle off Samar, a maelstrom of steel and fire, ultimately secured one of the most vital strategic victories of the Pacific War, though Taffy III endured a near annihilation. Losing 4 ships and suffering immense human cost, their audacious stand bought precious time. The Leyte Gulf Campaign, the largest naval battle in history, dealt a decisive blow. It effectively ended Japan's offensive capabilities in the Pacific. It prevented them from challenging the relentless American advance toward Tokyo. The sacrifice of the small boys and the desperate courage of the escort carrier pilots ensured MacArthur's landing forces were protected. It changed the course of the war. Yet, for hundreds of American sailors, the fight for survival had only just begun. Cast into the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific, they faced a new, unglamorous kind of horror. Fuel oil, thick and stinking, coated everything. It was a grim blessing that repelled sharks and offered a measure of sunscreen against the relentless tropical sun, yet it also burned and choked. For up to 48 agonizing hours, men clung to splintered planks, floater nets, or the diminishing buoyancy of their kapok vests. These quickly soaked through and lost their life-saving power. The initial panic over sharks gave way to a wary acceptance. Dim grey triangles began to cut the water's surface, becoming more aggressive as darkness fell. Thomas Missouri was pulled from a plank. It was a terrifying reminder of the predators that haunted the bloodied waters. The nights were cold, the passage of time was glacial. The eerie phosphorescence of the water revealed the unseen horrors beneath. Attempts to sing familiar songs died out. They were replaced by a graveyard-like silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Severely injured men like Bill Stovall, whose catastrophic wounds offered no hope, were humanely eased into the water. It was a desperate act to end their agony. Dehydration set in, leading to vivid, tormenting hallucinations of lemonade and big white cottages with green shutters. Men like Eugene Wagner became violently delirious, cursing their officers. Some simply let go of the nets and disappeared into the night. Captain Bob Copeland, himself battling extreme exhaustion and delirium, was supported by his executive officer, Bob Roberts. Both set an example of stoicism for the 49 very wretched human beings on their raft. The fragility of the human body and mind under such duress was laid bare. It was a stark challenge to any romanticized notions of naval warfare. Rescue efforts were fragmented and agonizingly delayed. It wasn't until October 27, almost 2 days after the battle, that Rear Admiral Daniel E. Barbie organized a 7-ship task group to search for survivors. Lieutenant Commander James A. Baxter, skipper of the PC-623, defying orders to investigate very flares, made a decisive action that led them to the men. From midnight to the early hours of October 28, Baxter's group pulled survivors from the Gambier Bay, Howell Johnston, and Samuel B. Roberts. The process was arduous. Men like Tullio Serafini, delirious and heavy, required stronger manila ropes. Survivors like Copeland were greeted with questions like who won the World Series. To confirm their identity, the PC-623 became a black hole of Calcutta, severely overcrowded with nearly 200 men. This forced the pumping of 5,000 gallons of fuel to prevent floundering. For some, like Neil Defliff's, rescue came even later, after 48 hours at sea. He was stung by jellyfish and hallucinating, only to wake on a coral reef and be rescued by local Filipino guerrillas. The delayed and fragmented nature of these efforts contributed to an estimated 116 men dying at sea, unnecessarily. It was a cost Admiral Sprague himself attributed to Admiral Kincaid. In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. answer, the USR the Age, on one day 11. Navy exhibited an institutional amnesia or ennui regarding the Battle of Samar. They were reluctant to play up this action. Admiral Sprague, battered and silent upon his return, privately believed history would accord the battle its proper place a half a century or more after I have passed on. Many Taffy 3 carriers were sold off, and a hymen to the Argentine Navy. For decades, survivors suppressed their painful memories. The shared trauma hardened the bonds forged in their youth, like epoxy. A turning point arrived in the early 1980s. The commissioning of new USS frigates named after key figures from the battle served as a catalyst for survivors to organize and reconnect. The USS Clifton Sprague in 1981, the USS Copeland, honoring Tacoma attorney and Naval Reserve Rear Admiral Bob Copeland in 1982, and the USS Carr, named for Petty Officer Paul Henry Carr, in 1985, breathed new life into their collective memory. As shipmate Harold Kai observed, a lot of history ain't set down yet. This underscored the importance of these nascent reunions in collectively remembering their untold stories. The spirit of the original USS Samuel B. Roberts found a powerful and unexpected echo on April 14, 1988. The modern USS Samuel B. Roberts, FFG-58, struck an Iranian mine in the Persian Gulf. Her skipper, Captain Paul X. Rinn, recounted the monstrous blast that tore a 28-foot hole in her side. Flames rose 150 feet. The ship began sinking, a foot every 15 minutes. Rinn described a titanic moment when the lights flickered and then, miraculously, came back on. This inspired him to believe the ship could be saved through sheer will. His 214-man crew, facing missile-armed Iranian patrol planes, performed heroically. Jim Tilley, a previously reprimanded fireman, executed a suicide start on an auxiliary diesel. While George Carr, motivated by a fear of sharks and snakes in the water, kept the pumps running for 36 hours. Rinn attributed the ship's survival directly to the spirit inspired by the original DE-413. In 2001, a joint reunion in Albuquerque became a powerful bridge between past and present. Captain Rin's dramatic recounting of the modern Robert's near sinking and survival resonated deeply with the aging survivors. It punched a sizable hole in this barrier of time. Modern crew members, observing a large bronze plaque displaying the image of the original DE-413 and the names of her crew, would often touch it. They were bonding with the heroism of the past. This interaction demonstrated how legend, tradition, history can drive a commitment to excellence. The enduring legacy of the Battle off Samar is not just a military victory. It is woven into the profound and lasting bonds forged among survivors. It is the transmission of their courage and resilience through generations. Active survivor associations continue to meet. Children and grandchildren increasingly attend, ensuring the tradition endures. Samar stands as a powerful testament to American capability in extremis. It demonstrates that when courage, initiative, and resourcefulness are called upon, the impossible can be achieved, even against overwhelming odds. It is a legacy that continues to inspire.